Uh, so let's see. People are coming quickly in. Perfect. So let's let time pass so we can have more and more people catch the full conversation. And in the meantime, Shan, where are you now? I saw like a video from skiing and I was very envious. So are you still in some more vacational area with lots of snow, mountains, and fun?
But so the best part is I'm not on a vacation. I actually live in one of such places. So I live in Zurich. So snow is part of
Oh,
it. Yeah. So that was during my weekend skiing, and I thought it would be interesting to just send them a quick buzz saying that we both are talking. Cannot find a better day, and it was a beautiful day that day when I was on the slopes. So that's where it is.
so actually, I have a quick, funny, non-related story about it. I live by the sea in Poland. It's not Miami or anything. It's just Baltic Sea with its plain beaches and very not luxurious whereabouts, but it's still sea and still sand, which
Okay.
people who don't live by the sea really enjoy. However, as a person living by the sea, I visited like 2 or 3 times a year for a walk, and it's nothing special. It's been always there for me because I live close to it. But back when COVID hit, we traveled a lot with my wife, and we went to Polish mountains because we have the funny country where we have sea on the north and mountains on the south. And we've met a person who lived there her entire life, and she said that she visits mountains twice or once a year because they are always there. Who cares to visit them? So you always wish for what you don't have. And
True.
to say here,
Very true.
because
Very true. I completely agree.
it's a good time to do that. Um, we always wish to have great growth engines, and somehow we omit the ones that we already have. And APIs are one of them. And before I start the interview with my fabulous guest, Shan from Digital API, a person who knows APIs through and through in 2026, I want to tell you about my first job as a product manager in a company called Idibu. It used to be a small startup that whole premise was that we gave people a single posting form that allowed recruiters to post a job offer to different job boards at the same time. So it was a time saver. You didn't have to fill in the same details over and over again to different job boards. And the company uh, grew, grew slowly. It was a difficult market. There was a big competitor already there on the market. But somehow, somewhere, we developed an API. And slowly but surely, the API became the main product of Edibu because our form, our interface, wasn't the main meat and potatoes as it turned out, but the ability to easily embed ourselves into other products that had a full recruitment suite from like developing the ad, finding the clients, to then analyzing the applicants, having the ability to easily input so-called multi-posting there proved to be the actual growth engine on the Edible that launched it from a small startup to a medium, very successful, and ultimately purchased company in the end. And I was the we when we had a very uh, poor API that hardly worked, and I, as a PM, developed that API into something that, rather than be integrated in months, could be integrated in a few days with very little support and with very little support tickets later. And I still believe that nowadays, in the era of AI, where everyone is chasing the artificial intelligence dream, APIs are still very relevant, are still the ability to change a small company that has a very isolated offer into something that can be packaged within a greater ecosystem and thus grow a small idea into a big company and a big success. And to help me go through that journey for the developers and product managers in 2026, as already mentioned, I have Shan with me. Shan, hi, thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bart, and thank you for actually that very insightful, a quick of what a product manager can actually change the dimension of a company, right? And what I liked about the reference, it's the same API which someone can take weeks and months to consume, and that's the same API which you can actually make it consume in a couple of hours, right? And it's the value proposition where API really brings onto the table. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
really, thank you.
it's an actual being that's a separate product that if you don't care, it will just stall, degrade, or and be forgotten or not work properly or not give you the value you need. On the other hand, if you work with what it can give you on the market, if you listen to your customers, which in this case would be your B2B partners and later down the line users in the other ecosystem, then it can open new growth engines that you never thought possible when you started.
Yeah, I think, see, so that's a very interesting anecdote, right? So when you're talking about why do such big programs stall, right? And people always talk about, you know what? I have a solid infrastructure, and I've actually spinned up an API program, and it has to be successful. But then, yes, it needs a lot more of just coming up with an initiative, especially when we come up with a program. The first biggest pitfall what I've seen in my career, or what I'm currently seeing talking to the prospects, is a very poor developer adoption. It's something out there, and who's looking into it, right? And the second important thing is inadequate governance, right? Because governance has to be baked in what you do, and it cannot be an afterthought. And the last one, what I also see is about value demonstration, right? So there is something out there, and I am spending, there is a TCO on it which I'm spending, and do I really able to demonstrate that value to the organization, right? And apart from this, also what other things I see, there is a program, but what does the program actually bring onto the table, right? Do you really have a developer portal for someone to discover what is actually put on there as part of the program, right? And then there's also, I see, you actually alluded to the point, right? So yes, you built an API, and that's basically constituted a product. How often do you evolve to cater to the business needs, right? That's also important, or that's also one of the common pitfalls what I see, where people don't really like contribute to the program. And the last one is the very common term, we call it as downtime, right? There's a very interesting study which happened in 2022, where most of the programs failed, where they've actually witnessed more than 60% of downtime, right, on whatever is being put, or the very nature of complex microservices, which people thought I'm going to write something very tech stuff, and then the basics have been forgotten. So I think that's where again, you would have seen this in many, many years in your career, right? Coming up with an initiative is much easier, but what's the next step?
Yeah, and it's the same story across APIs and new features, basically. But let me be a devil's advocate here too, because on one hand, I do mention a very successful story of mine, which is arguably a bit dated at this time. Now as I mentioned, we are inexplicably in the era of AI. And how do you think that APIs work along the AI agents that presumably don't really need APIs and they just can browse products and websites like a normal user? Does this change the picture, or am I reading too much into this?
No, you're absolutely spot on. Trust me, after the AI agents and the automation, the new automation era we are talking, the API stakes are very, very high. It's elevated, right? Purely, so you keep hearing these two terms interchangeably in especially on the industry. One is people talk about dynamic discovery, why is that so important now? And then keep also talking about fine grain access. All these have always been there, but why it had so much of importance now? And then we also talk about real time governance, right? So these three tickers should always comes in your mind. And the last one, no, all this is why now we are talking about non-human consumer. So a human consumer can still figure out if something is not work, and I can go fix it. But then we are expected this to be aligned for a non-human consumer at scale, right? And also what we talk about, agents also introduce a lot of risk. It's not just about AI does only wonderful things. AI also does some disaster if things are not maintained well, especially on the API foundation layer, right? And one common thing, so we keep talking about rapid proliferation all that time without an oversight, right? And the second one, insecure credentials. These are all, the moment an agent is configured, the credentials are put in place. Do we ever checked about the overprivileged access what's being given to the agent, right? All this now put your API ecosystem at very high stake. And also, there are always common controls we have built, but is it sufficient for us in the agent era, right? That's the question I would like to ask, especially a person like you who's been talking to day in and day out in the industry, right? Is API gateway good enough, or the world is now keenly talking about AI gateway? Is it something we should need to think about?
Well, I think that gateways are very important in order to help you there in the discovery process. You may have an API ready lying around, even maintained, but if it's not part of your value proposition, if it's not maybe not front and center, but if your potential partners who can use your product or your service in their bigger ecosystem, then it's wasted effort. It's if you don't put like close to a marketing effort to having a gateway to your API, it's like having a new feature and not making any buzz about it or not helping the users discover it. I do think that this is particularly important nowadays when you are starved for growth, where there is not too much space for innovation. Don't get me wrong, there is space for innovation, but like after having a very good internet, a very fine developers for dozens of years, there there are very little moments like ChatGPT emergence where someone fixes a problem in a very new way or uh, proposes a solution that was not there before. Therefore, we as product managers, as CEOs, CTOs, need to find a way to grow on different fronts, whether that's quality, whether that's price, whether that's specialization to be uh, very approachable, easy to use, but with limited feature, or very specialized, high premium, or in the same sentence, very API driven. The thing is that I think no one really appreciates when thinking about API is that it's not only unlocking additional users, additional revenue streams. It's actually unlocking new sales teams. That's something that very well resonated back in the Idibu days, where our API efforts would be motivated by saying that if we integrated with 10 people, 10 companies, we would have 10 teams mentioning that they support multi-posting from Idibu. If you have Idibu account, you can multi-post from us, or you can just purchase them with us at a premium price, and you will have the complete package to save your users time and effort. So this is something that I don't think I've heard more in like on LinkedIn, on any press, and that's always something that resonated with me when I thought about APIs.
Yeah, I think if we just put to the context, right?
Mhm.
API has always been opening up new business avenues, right? And if you see
Mhm.
even the way the maturity curve has taken over, initially we thought APIs are basically replacing a much better integration layer, right? And then that's where a lot of people were like thinking about moving from SOAP to REST. Okay, now I have a much robust integration. Is that something I have to use? Then we started talking about API first approach. Then we start talking about how do you drive products with. So that's where there's a very famous term industry keeps referring, right? Tech driven business. And API actually got that term in the industry, right? It's not anymore API is just tech. API is actually a product and it's actually a business and it's actually a business driven on its own, right? I think that's where we're alluding to. And yes, I also have to agree with you on it is the proposition has always been moving around, and also API is one term which we commonly call agnostic of industry. It is always when we talk something new, we usually talk specific to an industry or specific to a business vertical, but this is one asset in my view. Whether you take logistics, we talk pharma, we talk banking, we talk insurance, we talk airline, doesn't matter. It's an asset class which fits seamlessly everywhere, and that's my take on that.
So let me take the discussion in a slightly different direction, but still relevant, very relevant. Let's say that many people who heard us now say, okay, you convinced me. I want more growth. I want more salespeople. I did mention that we have partners in the API, in the API ecosystem, that we want to go through the gateway. And we then have like stakeholders as the API providers. We have additional stakeholders as API users, as understood by people who use our services through our proxy partner. But we create additional stakeholder, which is the external developer that works with our API or our API gateway. So my question is, what would be the best practices to, well, get those developers that have nothing to do with us just go there and know how to use the API, scale it, and use it at optimal costs?
Yeah, so again, this touches upon a very interesting analogy we're talking about, right? So first, let's talk about developer experience. That itself is actually a growth lever, right? So,
Mhm.
and every time, when does a developer appreciate? When there is a good avenue for a discovery, right? And even though it's a very underprivileged term people talk about, but if you are a developer, but you would have always been sitting in front of a pool of developers, and if you show like this is what I'm looking for, and if it's instantly searchable, right, via a centralized catalog, right, and with a very well enriched metadata, I'm sure every word resonates to you, right? Interactive sandboxes, right?
Mhm.
Run, like again, my favorite, a friendly tool, run in Postman buttons, right? All these are delights for a developer, right? And end of the day, what we're talking, how do we serve a frictionless exploration? That's what we're talking about, right? That sets the developer on, what to appreciate or to adopt when we put something, and that solves 50% of the problem, either within the organization or external to it. Because when we build something, the biggest advantage for us to make the adoption happen is for citizen developer, not for a crowd targeting. This is what they're doing. And now, what does a developer expect in the AI powered generation, right? It's basically research across protocols, right? So we keep hearing new terms, and also we need to keep in mind we're talking also about real time, right? Risk signals as well. Developers are also very very aware. It's not just about getting that experience and getting that flavor of, what, the wow moment, but also need to be absolutely aware of what is actually bringing the risk element to it. And the last one, we also talk about SDKs was always there in the last decade, but now SDKs are coming into the reality where every time we talk about SDKs, we talk about how do we fit an SDK into the workflows, right? And the last but not the least, how do we accelerate the innovation? That's the point you're alluding to as well, right? If someone do not reinvent the wheel, but then if you ensure that all these have been followed either in a sequence, and then accelerating innovation is inevitable, right? So I feel this is the real growth lever for a developer, and this actually drives the first step in experiencing something very new.
Hmm? Super, thank you. Great perspective. And still playing the devil's advocate a little bit, we did mention that APIs are products, which means their development is not all sunshine and rainbows. And perhaps there are with us people who wanted to go the API route and simply said that that's too much work, that they can divert the investment somewhere else and the ROI will be immediate and better. So one of the things that can slow you down or bring you down as like your optimism is API governance that you did mention already. So how how does it happen that the thing that's supposed to make sure that our API is best in the class actually becomes a blocker rather than an enabler?
Okay, that's a very sensitive topic because I'm always an advocate for governance.
Mhm.
So you're actually asked in a very nice way. Right? It's governance without slowing things. Like so, governance, according to everyone,
Mhm.
will always slow things, right? And again, if I have to think governance turns into a blocker, why? Most of the time we always think governance equal to 80% of manual process coming into the picture, right? API and manual never go hand in hand and is never went hand in hand, right? And what's also happening is we started creating this bottleneck by fostering especially shadow APIs. And also, it's a cultural resistance, right? There is an umbrella called governance. There is a set process which is run. Whether you take the latest state of our tech or you talk about something which is a legacy for the last 20 years, that vertical operates in the same fashion, right? So in that way, if you see, if I purely take a technical stand and wear a technical hat, right? What is that we need to ensure, especially when it comes to API, where governance plays a part, right? You have to ensure the first thing we keep talking about API, a very basic hygiene is schema validation. And then we keep talking about security scanning, right? All this ensure that the hygiene is taken care. And then we also have this very vague term, like every time we talk about API, policies are always basically the operating nomenclature for it, right? When sometime if a policy is not required, we never deprecate a policy, right? That's also plays a big part in the governance. And then again, most widely we keep referring as open API for a lot of things. How do I bring that compliance for open API if that's what I'm talking about, right? If all this can be aligned and if I can catch these issues early without halting my velocity, that's where we make a difference. And that's where I would sum it up governance without slowing, which has to be baked at every step of what you do, rather thinking I will do my first big chunk and then go to the governance view. And that's my take.
Awesome. And actually, that brings like an extra question that popped into my head, and maybe something that many people will like to also know. Do you believe that having an API does call to have a dedicated team, or it's better to make sure that those, for example, governance aspects or automating them should be done that existing workforce should be able to maintain API without too much hassle while keeping it up to date, keeping it useful, and for the lack of a better word, keeping it sexy and attractive to new partners.
Yeah, if you asked this question a couple of years back, I would have immediately given you an answer saying there needs to be a dedicated vertical looking into things. And also,
Mhm.
it depends on the scale at which we talk, right? So, if there's an organization we are talking about less than two APIs, but they still operate at 2 billion transactions a month, that requires a dedicated effort to look into these things. But then I also see organizations which has thousands of APIs and not seeing more than 2 million transactions in any form and shape of the business need not need a dedicated team, right? So if again we keep talking about self-sufficient teams these days, and also if you see the way we have actually gone along, so we talk about every organization has its top governance checks, right? That's which pretty much the list which says have you done this, have you done that, Have we done the runtime monitoring? Have we done the access controls? Have we done the breaking change detection? Have we done this, that? If that can be baked, and if usually it's the product umbrella which owns, maintain, runs, and deprecates, it can be the self-sustaining team. But if you're talking about, for example, Stripes and Twilios, it's practically not possible for the same team to handle that kind of scale when the business is actually driven on that governance, right? And yeah, that's again, I would say, to long story short, depends on the maturity of the organization, depend on the scale which we operate, and the criticality of how which operate. That sums it up for you.
So it sounds like when I'm a startup owner or medium-sized company and I'm looking for new growth engines, I shouldn't be afraid of the investment because over time I'm able to support my new product after an quite obvious period of introducing it.
Yes, see, we talk about this automated governance behavior shift, right? That's what we are talking about, right? See,
Mhm.
over time, you will start automating or you will start embedding compliance into workflows, right? That's what eventually you're doing. And also the teams which has to shift from resistance to ownership, right? Now that I'm not going to say it's not an asset which I'm actually owning and managing it. Rather, you say, you know what, it's the asset which I'm going to like now own it. And the last one, also like see now the development scheme is also getting very innovative, right? So I know there's a bunch of known risk and I can handle it. I can reduce the churn and I can also tell how do I boost the reuse of the asset, right? So, and we keep calling this term called secure by default. So now that what you get as an investment which you do on the on early days of a startup where it is actually built as part of the whole ecosystem. So 1 year down the road when you're operating at scale, this comes in very handy, right? And I would say that it's also a behavioral shift in my view. And once people start taking this feedback and start building on the pipeline with feedbacks, and that's the big change which you can see.
Good to know. Thank you. Listen, one more thing that really mm, drives my thoughts is that you can obviously monetize your API by, like, let's call it organically, when you just get new clients from the integrations that your API unlocks. But there's also an opportunity to monetize API directly by giving people access. And I think that maybe it's worth to address the single API story that hit the news in the recent years because, well, API is not very often too newsworthy, but Reddit put it on the front page when they changed their API from open to closed and, well, very expensive for people who used it before. And on one hand, it didn't really bring them a lot of monetization, but on the other hand, it brought them a lot of new traffic to the website because the API dependent partners had to shut down. And it sounded to me like it was all like calculated to get your, let's call it, um, humorous. No, that's too offensive to those products. I don't mean it like that. It was like they had good intentions, but they did affect Reddit negatively when it comes to their bottom line and their product and, well, their generated traffic. So to that end, in the very great story where there are heroes and villains and you're not sure who's who, and it all depends on the perspective, when does it make sense to monetize API and when should you refrain from it and just keep it open to, I don't know, get yourself more marketing or more API driven traffic? What's your take on it?
Yeah, thanks for asking this question, but because a lot of people think when I write an API, I have to monetize it, right? And that's where they go wrong. See, you should monetize APIs only when they deliver proven, right? So what does that mean? See, I come up with a very unique value with a strong adoption. And also, see, when you're trying to monetize an API, it needs an extra level of attention on mature infrastructure, right? In terms of stability,
Mhm.
security, and also it has to have a very clear market fit, right? Like high demand data or like talking about capabilities which you don't have another competition in the market. That's where you set your ground clear that I know I want to monetize. And when does it make sense? That's also, see, when APIs do direct monetization, right? We keep hearing about this pay-per-use subscriptions, all these different ways of doing things. And I keep quoting this example to you, right? Imagine take their SMS voice APIs. It makes $1.4 billion a year, and it's an API, right? And think about Stripe tiered access, right?
Mhm.
Those are APIs with a very clear value proposition, and they all can operate at scale, right? That makes sense for you to do it. And then it also, there will be, these are direct revenue models we're talking. There's also indirect revenue models, right? For example, bank, insurance companies, financial markets do this, where it basically drives upselling. It's not about where you monetize for a dollar value, but where you create the stickiness, where you talk about like how do I take of data sharing to keep my clients intact, and also how do I align to this whole strategy, right? When you should avoid, and actually more than when you have to make it monetize, you should also be very clear when you should avoid, right? Whenever you think the offering is immature, and you as a product manager, if not convinced that something I should even show internally across the organization, never ever take that big step that you want to monetize. This is a double-edged sword. When you put something out there, if it is not of that quality for you, someone to even someone look at it, never ever do that. And the biggest thing, for example, open bank, a classic example, right? In open banking, a premature external focus will definitely fail without internal process even wins it first, right? So that's what every time a bank writes an API, they have to ensure someone internally within the organization are actually adopting and consuming it before you put it externally, right? So that's what you should do. And the last one, again, it's always about the maturity, right? Don't be in a rush unless until you know your API and the proposition you're putting is matured. Because most of the time, once you put it out, pulling out that external facing asset is a big challenge. You would have seen that as a PM, right? So success demands a lot of things for you to monetize API. For example, you need a very good dev portal for someone to look at it. A KPI is very well defined KPI for what you need to do. And the last one, enterprise also like falter because without adoption and there is no P&L alignment, it's going to be like more of good to have rather you're really going to make a P&L impact of that. So that is my sequence on how someone have to choose why when to monetize, what not to do it, and how to avoid it as well.
Apologies, I was so amazed that I hit my microphone and it almost fell down, but I've rescued it. And speaking of rescue, I wanted to also talk about digital API that you represent. And we talked about lots of issues that APIs can pose to be effective, to be discoverable, to be governed. So when people see digital API first, what's the problem that they immediately recognize as, yeah, this is us, this is what we're suffering from? So what's the main value proposition of digital API?
I think so. Me talking across prospects, the first two thing resonates is when I talk about discovery, right? Gone those days, API just sits in gateway, right? So every time when I ask them a first big question, do you know how many APIs do you have in your organization? People give me a number. And the second big question I ask them is, okay, do you know where are the APIs resides? They again give me another number, right? So when we start taking these things into consideration, we always tell them only one thing. You know what? It's not assumed that your all your APIs are sitting in a gateway. It may sit in so in the last especially 7 8 years, a lot of APIs sit as a Postman collection than as a real API in a gateway, right? And second one, also, you keep hearing these terms about people really looking into also having their assets maintained in Swagger Hub, GitHub repos, and people also do the recent things I'm hearing a lot of people are using Azure repos. So every time when I say I can discover every single API asset within the organization, they said, yes, yes, you know what? We were always able to find APIs running in a gateway, but not in any other form and shape. And the second one they also struggle is like once the discovery is done, basically it's cataloging and documentation, right? That sets the fundamental of what you want to operate. And I think we are actually best at what we do there. And I think that always resonates and what people want to do. Maybe, but I would like to maybe quickly show because it's easy for the audience to also have
Perfect.
what
Yeah.
we do, right?
A
So,
demo is worth 1,000 meetings.
thank you so much because I thought like it's easy for teams to. So this is like I'm. taking a non-white label, a vanilla version to show. I can show some fancy marketplace we have built, but this. So if you see, this is what we have started doing it. So again, we support most of the gateways because every organization in a large scale have at least two or three gateways to support. So we started keep writing this framework in connectors. So I think we currently support around 15 odd gateways out of the box, but we can start writing. If, for example, there's a gateway it's not in my list and someone wants one, we can write in the next 2 weeks to connect to them. And then apart from this, I keep talking about this one. So this is the most looked upon asset these days, not anymore gateways. We were working with one of the prospects who has 70% of the API sitting as a Postman collection, never ever seen a gateway, right? So that was a reason why we actually also pushed ourselves to write. And then every time when we talk to a different prospect, we understand there's a large number of APIs sitting in many different places. So that's why you see this boxes keep coming up every time when we find a new discovery in avenue. Apart from that, the next thing I was talking, no matter where we discover an API, right? Whether we discover from a gateway or from any different source, we believe that cataloging is an absolutely important the way you present what people we're talking about adoption, we're talking about people coming on board with ease and stuff. This makes life easier. And then as a product manager, you know the importance of metadata, right? So we also ensure if you are in an organization with like more than hundreds of APIs, I do not remember every API name or description, but I know the source of that API. That's where metadata plays a role, right? So this is where we really score very high. Apart from that, again, we also do a lot of different things as part of the platform. Maybe I want to quickly show is another important element is analytics. We do both design time and runtime to bring you absolute transparency someone runs the platform. And also we very proud in talking about, we keep talking about security posture all the time. So we also ensure that every time we bring an asset on the table, we always ensure that how do I bring and ensure that the asset is safe and asset is secured from our side. So we also maintain a very clear list of compliance dashboards for every asset we bring onto the platform. I'm not going to go in detail, but we show what are the different things we do. We also have a very inbuilt security center and what we do different things. We also absolutely eradicate API sprawls on the platform so that you never want to have another duplicate sitting there. And the last best thing is I keep talking about, I used to be a very big fan in the past of Postman and Bruno's because I used to be an API guy and I used to, a lot of these platforms to test. Always what stopped me is I need to take this asset to go somewhere to test it, right? How do I bring this experience as part of the same platform without me taking anything? And that's why we have actually launched our testing utility, right? It's called as Hypertest. So everything what you can see what Bruno or Postman does, this utility does it seamlessly for you to like take it from here. This is one of the biggest USPs which resonates to every time you show to a prospect, right? And this is in a nutshell what we offer as a platform. Again, I always like to go with industry benchmarks, talking to Gartners, talk to analysts. So every time when we bring up with something, we want to see where do we stand in the industry and how do we actually rate ourselves as well, right? Again, I would also want you to test this at some point, and I would like to take your recommendations and take your feedback how well we and how and what I've actually done as a platform as well, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
that's quickly what we do in this space, and yeah, and over to you, Bart.
Thank you. So that basically takes all the AI challenges, and allows you to like outsource them with you guys. Like this, even automated testing, sandboxing, gatewaying, automated platforms, documentation. I remember doing this all by hand, and that wasn't the most fun part of the API, and I was motivated by growth to begin with. So, but thank you for showing me this. I guess there are three questions remaining, as I can see. The first one is, where, if I'm the money man, where do I go to talk to you guys to see if digital API is the right partner for me?
Um, See again, there are many avenues, so it's a tough for me to just take one stand here. So see, irrespective of which maturity stage you are near your API journey, we
Mm-hmm.
cater. For example, if someone is doing this from scratch for the first time, we basically build the entire foundation for you to how agnostic of where you run and how you run. If you are somewhere in the middle where, you know what, I've been running for the last 2 years and I'm not looking at the efficiency, not able to build a value proposition, we also shape that ecosystem for you to what next and how do you also seamlessly adopt into the AI equation. The last one, if you're a very mature player, been doing this in the business, but you know what, am I really looking at an ROI or a monetization? That's where we also bring our equation as well, right? So we fit in every pockets and where you want and which maturity curve you are in the current API scheme of things, and we can actually fit you in. So that's what I would say.
Awesome, perfect. We still have two questions from the guests. Let me read it to you. The first one is from anonymous attendee. Oh, let me actually read it from the other stage so I'm not overwhitened. And the question is, will API gateways become AI gateways? I see proliferation of MCP integrations in popular products like API G.
Right. I it's I think it's one of a question because thanks for asking this question because you know every organization is invested very heavily on API gateways, but then we see the industries keep talking about AI gateways, and they're also trying to prove that it's completely different. I would agree to some extent, yes, but now what is currently proven, right, as we speak today, we keep talking about the maturity of MCP is basically building on top of an existing API ecosystem, right? So we talk about how do I make an MCP server, then we look into an API, we basically convert that to an MCP server and we host it, right? Which need not mandate for an AI gateway. But then when you start going beyond, when this is put into discovery for external tools, right? How does an agent come into the equation? How does the communication happens? That demands for an AI gateway, right? So again, to also argue, the list of use cases and the problems we solve in an AI gateway is very different from what you do in an API gateway in the past, right? There should be at some point should be a synergy because there is a lot of heavy investments have gone into an API gateway. And then you also ask organizations to invest in AI gateway. That's going to be a challenge, even though the audience are very different where the funding and where the request comes from. But this is a classic question also analysts look at. At some point, you need to make that decision saying, can I extend or leverage the existing API gateway to also start addressing AI equations, or it has to be a separate equation?
Okay, perfect. Guys, if you have more questions, we do have Q&A time planned. So if there's anything you'd like to ask, do it on chat, do it using the Q&A option. But before that, we do still have another question from, I hope I don't butcher this name, Abiram. Does API AI does DigitalAPI test for SOAP and gRPC in build?
Yeah, so we started supporting SOAP because we currently work with a lot of our clients and prospects who are on web methods and they do a lot of SOAP contracts. So we do support SOAP out of the box. So gRPC, we still not seen a lot of uptake. It's currently there in our R&D roadmap because we now started focusing a lot on we do a lot of GraphQL these days because even the testing utility I was talking, usually most of the utility out there supports REST and SOAP, but we also extended to start supporting GraphQL. gRPC is definitely there where we have done a first preliminary version, but if we really see there's a demand or an uptake, this is something we will definitely bring as part of the product roadmap to support out of the box itself.
Hmm? All right, thank you. I don't see any. Oh, maybe there's one actually. Thanks. That's not a question. That's an affirmation. So listen, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Shan, for having um, well, eye-opening discussion where I still believe after this live that uh, APIs are not going anywhere and are still underappreciated. There are still separate products that can change a small company into a big, successful one. You do need to think large. You need to think ecosystems and partners. And if you don't, you are missing out on a great growth engine that you can utilize. So that was an awesome discussion. And over to you for the last words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bart. It was great. It's always rare that you talk to a practitioner and also who's actually moved away from being a hands-on hardcore person to start practicing now running Very useful workshop references for a lot of product managers out there. So it was great conversation because you picked up a lot of very interesting, very unusual podcast kind of questions because not people go into that depth. So I hope we have really like given something for the audience to take away. And yes, we also do a lot of product videos. We also do a lot of, I write a lot of newsletters on what we do on just not on the product what we supply, but also on the industry as well. So feel free to reach out to us. As I told you, you are in any maturity curve of your API journey, and there is an opportunity we can actually work together, and I'm just looking forward for that. Thank you so much, Bart, and thank you so much for making time and joining our session. Good luck. Thank
It's
you.
my pleasure. I'm Dr. Bart. I can be found on LinkedIn, and you can find Digital API AI just by typing those words into your browser. And good luck growing your products and being a product manager, money person, whoever you are, for whatever reason you joined. Thank you. It was an awesome session. Have a great rest of your day, evening, guys, and I'll see you in the next live shows. Bye bye.
Thanks, Bart. Thank you.
Thank you.